Bugatti CEO just did the unthinkable, right after Matt Armstrong's proof. Only 60 Bugatti Chiron per sports were ever built. After a crash in Miami, the world was down to 59 roadworthy examples, and one very expensive question mark sitting in a workshop. What happened next wasn't just a car repair. It became a public standoff between a British YouTuber with a wrench and the CEO of one of the most exclusive car brands on earth, and it ended in a way almost nobody expected. Chapter 1. A $6 million problem. The car belonged to Alex Gonzalez, a young Miami-based content creator who had owned the Chiron Per Sport for only a couple of months before it was badly damaged in a crash. An expert flown in from the Bugatti side inspected the wreckage and declared it a write-off. It was given a salvage title and sent to a cop-art auction, the kind of ending that normally means a car like this simply disappears from the road forever. But instead of vanishing quietly, the story reached Matt Armstrong, a UK-based mechanic and YouTuber known for reviving wrecked exotics that other shops had given up on. When he heard about a written-off, six-figure-month hypercar sitting in Miami, he booked a flight before he'd even seen a single photo of the damage in person. Even getting to the car wasn't drama-free. On the way to the workshop, a Chevrolet cut across several lanes of traffic and slammed into a Ferrari being driven by one of Armstrong's own team members. That crash was minor by comparison, only a few $1,000s in damage, but it meant the team arrived to find two wrecked cars waiting for them instead of one, a strange preview of the chaos that was about to define the entire project. What Armstrong found when he finally inspected the Chiron in person wasn't good, but it wasn't hopeless either. The nose was crumpled, the airbags had deployed, and the carbon fiber bodywork was scuffed and cracked in places, with panels visibly misaligned and suspension components shifted out of position. Bugatti's own estimate for full factory repair came in at roughly $1.7 million, a figure that included headlights, fenders, a bonnet, and the brand's signature horseshoe grille, each priced like a small house. For Armstrong and Gonzalez, that number wasn't just steep. It was the whole point of the story that followed. Gonzalez himself added an unusual detail to the saga. He was only 25, had owned the car for barely 2 months before the crash, and was reportedly still paying somewhere in the range of $86,000 to $91,000 a month on it even after the accident. For him, the choice wasn't really between a cheap fix and an expensive one. It was between watching a car he was still paying for every month sit as illegal goes indefinitely, or taking a chance on an independent rebuild that might never be recognized by the manufacturer at all. Chapter 2. The Blacklist. Here's where the situation stopped being a normal repair job. Because the car had been declared a total loss, Bugatti locked its VIN in the company's global system. In practice, that meant no authorized Bugatti dealership anywhere in the world, from Miami to Molsheim, was permitted to sell parts of that specific chassis. If Armstrong wanted to rebuild a car outside of Bugatti's own factory process, he would be doing it with no support from the manufacturer at all. Bugatti's position wasn't unreasonable on its face. The Chiron platform is an extraordinarily complex piece of engineering, an 8-liter, quad-turbocharged W16 engine wrapped in a carbon fiber monocoque, built to handle speeds well over 250 miles per hour. The company argued that certain structural procedures, particularly separating the front and rear sections of the chassis, required specialized jigs that existed at only a couple of facilities in the world. Attempting that kind of separation in an ordinary garage, in Bugatti's telling, risked turning an already damaged hypercar into an unsalvageable pile of carbon fiber and titanium. Armstrong didn't see it as a technical war so much as a business decision dressed up as one. He'd spent years pulling apart cars that manufacturers had written off, and he wasn't convinced this one was any different, just more expensive. Chapter 3. Taking it apart, one bolt at a time. Rather than shipping the car to France and paying 7 figures, Armstrong and his father, a longtime mechanic in his own right, set up in a private workshop and started working through the car piece by piece. Early on, they ran into exactly the challenge Bugatti had warned about, separating the transmission from the main block to properly assess the drivetrain damage. According to mate Rimac, Bugatti CEO, only 2 facilities on the planet were equipped to do that kind of separation safely. Armstrong's team approached it methodically anyway, working through the modular design bolt by bolt. It turned out the process mostly came down to removing the right fasteners in the right order. The front and rear sections came apart without the disaster Bugatti had implied was likely. That teardown revealed something that reframed the whole project. underneath the carbon fiber skin and the seven-figure price tags on individual panels. The Chiron structure was built in a genuinely modular way, held together by a manageable number of high-grade bolts rather than some kind of unrepeatable factory magic. It didn't make the car simple. It's still one of the most complex machines ever put on public roads. But it meant the idea that it was mechanically untouchable outside of Bugatti's own walls wasn't quite true either. As they dug further, Armstrong and his team also found something that Bugatti had never advertised. Some interior components, including a pair of airbags, ultimately came from Audi A3 units and were fully compatible with the Chiron. Given that Bugatti and Audi both sit under the Volkswagen Group umbrella, the overlap made sense from an engineering standpoint, even if it wasn't the kind of detail featured in a Bugatti brochure. Armstrong also pointed out one small, almost funny detail that stuck with viewers. The accelerator pedal controlling all 1,500 horsepower turned out to be a simple molded plastic piece, not the milled billet aluminum component people might expect on a multi-million-dollar car. It was a reminder that even at this level, not every part is a hand-carved marvel. Some of it is just a car. For a while, the online chatter around the build took an unexpected turn when eagle-eyed viewers spotted what looked like a hairline crack in footage of the rebuilt car. Fine cracks in carbon fiber structures are exactly the kind of thing that can quietly turn into a major failure, so the concern spread fast through the comment section. Armstrong addressed it directly, and it turned out to be nothing more than dirt on the underside of the chassis catching the light in a sighting way. It was a small moment, but it captured just how closely this build was being watched and how much scrutiny Armstrong was operating under with every single video. Chapter 4. Improvising where the parts wouldn't come. With no factory support and a blacklisted VIN, Armstrong's team had to get creative constantly. A pinched coolant overflow pipe, normally a simple parts counterfix, was solved instead with a section of rigid brake hose. New radiators had to be custom built to replace the destroyed originals. No small task on a car that runs 10 of them. When the destroyed exhaust needed replacing, the specialist shop Valvetronic stepped in to fabricate a custom system rather than waiting on an official part that wasn't coming. The most significant obstacle turned out to be a small but critical engine mount bracket, a component engineered to intentionally break during a crash so it could redirect impact forces away from more critical structures. It had done exactly what it was designed to do in the accident, which meant it now needed replacing, and Bugatti didn't sell it as a standalone part. Rather than accepting defeat, Armstrong's team explored 3D, scanning the fractured mount, converting it into a CAD model, and having a replacement CNC machined, an approach aimed at producing something at least as strong as a factory original. That gearbox mount ended up being one of the most talked about parts of the entire rebuild. It's a component deliberately engineered to be fragile, designed to snap in a crash so that impact forces get redirected through the rest of the car's structure rather than concentrated in one spot. That's a smart piece of safety engineering right up until the moment it actually breaks, because Bugatti doesn't sell it separately, and a replacement through official channels would have meant buying an entirely new engine and gearbox housing. Rather than accept that, a specialist welder TIG welded the shattered mount back together, a repair that plenty of people in the industry assumed simply wasn't possible on a part designed to fail the way this one was. None of this was about proving a point for its own sake. It was a demonstration that modern scanning and machining tools, along with old-fashioned welding skill, have genuinely closed some of the gap between a factory floor in France and a well-equipped independent workshop in the English Midlands. Chapter 5. Rimac gets involved. What happened next is a part of this story that surprised almost everyone. Mate Rimac, the Bugatti CEO and founder of the EV manufacturer Rimac Automobile, didn't respond the way corporate leadership usually does when a viral repair project starts chipping away at a brand's mystique. He didn't go silent, and he didn't send a cease and desist. He engaged publicly, on social media and in a response video, directly addressing the build. Rimac's message wasn't a simple concession. He raised genuine, specific safety concerns, pointing out that the gearbox housing had shattered and that the monocoque had sustained real structural damage, and warning that shortcuts on a 1,500 horsepower car carry consequences that go well beyond cosmetics. He also pushed back on some of the more inflated numbers circulating online about Bugatti's repair and maintenance costs, saying plainly that a lot of what people were repeating simply wasn't accurate. At the same time, Rimac made an offer that acknowledged the reality of the situation. Alex Gonzalez was contacted directly, with Bugatti proposing to ship the car to France for a full factory repair, and later offering to complete the fix in the range of $600,000 to $700,000, a steep drop from the original $1.7 million figure. Gonzalez turned both offers down. He wanted the car repaired in Miami, and he wanted Armstrong to be the one doing it. Rather than walking away at that point, Bugatti eventually lifted the VIN blacklist. It was a genuine reversal of a policy the company had defended as necessary just months earlier, and it meant Armstrong's team could finally source at least some components through normal channels. Chapter 6. What the standoff actually revealed. Armstrong himself later admitted he was startled that Bugatti's leadership was watching his channel closely enough to respond to it directly, let alone put out a video addressing the build by name. He was careful to say he wasn't trying to start a fight with the brand. He simply wanted a path to fixing the car that didn't require the original seven-figure quote, and he intended to keep working on it regardless of whether Bugatti cooperated. The biggest story here isn't really about one crash hypercar. It's about what happens when a legacy manufacturer, built on decades of tightly controlled exclusivity, runs into the reality of modern content creation and modern fabrication tools at the same time. Bugatti's instinct, blacklist of VIN, quote, an enormous factory-only repair, keep the process fully in-house, is the same instinct that protected brand prestige in this industry for generations. What changed is that millions of people were watching Armstrong's channel as he worked through the problem in near real time, and the manufacturer's own CEO turned out to be one of them. Rimac's response mattered precisely because it wasn't dismissive. He didn't concede that home rebuilds were as safe as factory ones. He held that safety concerns were real. But he also didn't pretend the conversation wasn't happening. And in the end, Bugatti moved, lifting a restriction it had defended as necessary for the integrity of the brand and the safety of the car. Chapter 7. A bigger conversation about ownership. The standoff also landed at an interesting moment for the wider industry. Right around the same time Armstrong was pulling the Chiron apart bolt by bolt, Bugatti itself was unveiling its next flagship, the Tourbillon. Built around a naturally aspirated 8.3-liter V16 rather than a turbocharged engine, and designed with analog gauges built by watchmakers instead of digital displays. Rimac has described the car in interviews as something closer to mechanical watch than a modern digital hypercar, a deliberate move toward visible, understandable engineering rather than a sealed black box. That direction says something about where Rimac, as an engineer and founder himself before he ever ran Bugatti, seems to actually want the brand to go. He built his own company, Rimac Automotive, starting from an old BMW he modified in a garage, which is part of why his response to Armstrong's project read differently than a typical corporate statement. He wasn't just defending a policy from behind a legal team. He was engaging, publicly and repeatedly, with the specific technical claims Armstrong was making, correcting some, conceding others, and ultimately changing Bugatti's position on the VIN block. The episode also fed into a much larger conversation happening across the car world about who actually controls a vehicle after it's sold, and how much of that control now runs through software and manufacturer databases rather than a bill of sale. A locked VIN doesn't touch the engine or the chassis at all. It's a purely administrative decision that determines whether dealers are allowed to sell parts for a specific car. That kind of control had become increasingly common across the industry as vehicles get more computerized, and Armstrong's very public fight over it turned an obscure policy detail into something a much wider audience understood and had opinions about, whether they had any interest in hypercars or not. Chapter 8. A car still coming back to life. As of the most recent updates on the build, the Chiron Sport have been reassembled enough to start and run again, coolant systems, fuel, intercoolers, and ECU all brought back into working order after a long and improvised process. It isn't finished, and it will likely never carry the kind of factory certification a Conker's judge would look for. But it runs, it exists, and it did so largely because one mechanic and his father refused to accept that written off had to mean permanently silent. Whatever this car ends up looking like when the project wraps, it's already done something unusual. It forced one of the most secretive manufacturers in the automotive world into an actual public conversation about repair, cost, and access, conducted not through lawyers, but through video responses and direct outreach to the owner. That alone makes the 59th Chiron Sport one of the more consequential wrecks in recent car culture, whether or not it ever gets its factory badge back.